When I say you should set the meter up to work the way you work, I mean you need to know exactly how your meter functions. So we can't, in this class, go through all the meters that are out there in the world to show you how to do that. You're going to have to use your manual. But we can talk about the specific things you must do first. First, you have to set the ISO on the meter. Then you have to set the function of the meter to the type of photography you're doing. Reflected light meter reading, ambient light meter reading, flash meter reading, all of those settings. The meter will then give you back two sets of numbers usually. One's called an EV, exposure value, and the other are numbers you're more familiar with, f-stops versus shutter speeds. Most meters will allow you to set the shutter speed and then find the aperture, and also then turn it around and set the aperture and find the shutter speed. Sometimes you can just simply take a reading on either one of those things and find that sweet spot. I always think aperture first. With every photograph I do, it's aperture first. The first and foremost thing I do when I set my camera is to think about the aperture, because the aperture is the number one thing that's going to affect the look of the image and the kind of work I do. If I was a sports photographer, I might be thinking shutter speed first, but I'm not a sports photographer, so I think aperture. So once you've understood and you go through your manual and find how you set your camera, think about, your flash meter or your meter. Think about how you use that when you go out to do it. So you set your meter first for the ISO that you're going to use. Then choose either f-stop or shutter speed to make the value reading. So if I set my meter on f4, it'll give me shutter speeds that correspond to that. If I set it on 1/125th of a second, it'll give me shutter speeds that correspond to that. Or I can just simply leave it at base mode and then it'll give me a reading, and those shutter speeds and f-stops will correspond as I go through the wheel. I can change the time on this and it'll change my aperture. That's how I normally work with my meter. That's not how you have to work with yours, but normally I set my time at 1/125th of a second, my ISO at 100, and then I start taking my meter readings. The reason I do that is I do a lot of environmental work, and mostly that involves sunlight or shady or cloudy sunlight, shady areas, and I know those settings pretty much by heart. I know what the light is in any given setting. So my settings are at that point for a base. Now you can set that any way you want. I know some of you have cameras that have native ISOs of 200, so you might want to set your flash to ISO 200 and a shutter speed of 250 instead of 125, so that you're always at that base point for what I call Sunny 16. So your way of working is very important. The last thing that you need to do on your meters, and especially some of the newer meters, is you have to make a decision on how you want that light reading to come back to you. Some of the newer flash meters like Sekonics have the choice between half stops and third stops. Half stops, that's the realm I grew up with. Film cameras, we didn't even have half stops on the lenses. We'd sort of high center them. Half stops, many people these days shooting digital, we all have third stops. 6.3, 7.1, 8, 9, 10, 11 instead of 5.6, 5.6 and a half, 8, 8 and a half, 11. So make sure you get your meter calibrated to the way you work. If you work with 1/3 stops, get it set up that way.